And hello to our friends who watch Bible study after the fact. We are always glad to know that you are following. And for our prayer this morning, so many people like the prayers of Bishop Dion Johnson that I picked this one for Advent. And let us pray. Holy God, holy and mighty, give us hearts to perceive the hope of your reign breaking into our world once more, that we who are weary and waiting and watchful may welcome once more the child of Bethlehem, Jesus, your Son, into our hearts and homes. Amen.
Amen.
And did everybody see Ray's cartoon, his Dagwood cartoon?
Yes.
Dagwood and Blondel.
Yes.
I did. I thought
Funny.
Dagwood should have adopted an Advent attitude. He seemed to be nervous.
And rightly so.
Oh, it's funny.
Given what you're waiting for.
Exactly. All right. Well, before we get on to sheep and goats, I can't remember. I don't think I had this quote queued up for us last week, and I don't think I ever shared it. I went back and fast forwarded through the video, and I didn't see that I had. So I just thought I would share this. It's a framing concept. Again, I like to look to some commentators and scholars to do that for us. This is from Carla Works, who teaches at Wesley, right down the street from us. Joanne and Sue's alma mater. So let us pray, or not let us pray, let us hear these words. I don't know which end is up today. These words from Dr. Carla Works. God's kingdom does not function like a typical kingdom. This divine reign has invaded the world and is good news, especially to those on the fringes of society. This rule welcomes those who have no status and seeks to serve others rather than exploit them. The blessed ones are those who have seen a king who is not like the kings of this world. They are blessed because they know a king who brings real peace, who sees the needy, who hears the cries of the oppressed. In God's kingdom, no one is hungry, naked, sick, or alone. To bear witness to Christ as King is to be a messenger of this kingdom, to serve others and thereby profess the invasion of God's glorious empire. And so since we've been talking about apocalyptic and eschatological, the eschaton, eschatological visions and predictions, I thought maybe these words from Carla Works would be helpful. Any thoughts on them? Let me turn this off so you don't hear my dinging.
I think the word invasion is
Any
very
thoughts
interesting.
on this quote?
Did you hear me? I thought the word invasion was interesting.
That's the word that jumped out at me too, Louise. Yeah.
That
Yeah.
reflects on the C.S. Lewis quote where
Yes.
we're being subversive.
Exactly. Sometimes it doesn't feel like Christians are very subversive. But personally, I kind of get excited by that concept. It's inspirational. I'm hardly much of a subversive, but it gives me encouragement. Watch out, world. The older I get, the more subversive I may become. Any other thoughts?
Well, if I could just put an asterisk here and say, when we finish up, let me suggest a way to be mildly and constructively subversive that we can all partake in. And I'm doing that. I won't, well, it's apropos exactly the subject, but I will save it until later.
Okay, I'm so worried we're going to forget to come back to it. So don't forget, because I'm eager.
All right, I won't forget.
Good. All right. Don't let me log off without you telling us.
Okay.
Suggestion. All right. Anything else before we hit Matthew 25 again? Okay, and just focus on this king who sees the needy, hears the cries of the oppressed. We're in the kingdom where no one is hungry, naked, sick, or alone. And as we move into the end of Matthew 25. All right. And this was the gospel we heard on the feast of Christ the King. So, would somebody like to read the end of 25 from verse 31 to 46?
I'll do it.
All right. Thank you,
That's
Rick.
right.
Okay. When the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, then he will sit on the throne of his glory. All nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate people one from another, as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. And he will put the sheep at his right hand and the goats at his left. Then the king shall say to those at his right hand, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you gave me clothing. I was sick, and you took care of me. I was in prison, and you visited me." Then the righteous will answer him, "Lord, when was it that we saw you hungry and gave you food, or thirsty and gave you something to drink? And when was it that we saw you a stranger and welcomed you, or naked and gave you clothing? And when was it that we saw you sick or in prison and visited you?" And the king will answer them, "Truly I tell you, just as you did it to one of the least of these, my brothers and sisters, you did it to me." Then he will say to those at his left hand, "You who are accursed, depart from me into the eternal fire." Are you listening, Fred? "Prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me no food. I was thirsty, and you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger, you did not welcome me. Naked, and you did not give me clothing. Sick and in prison, and you did not visit me." Then they also will answer, "Lord, when was it that we saw you hungry or thirsty or a stranger or naked or sick or in prison and did not take care of you?" And then he will answer them, "Truly I tell you, just as you did not do it to the one of the least of these, you did not do it to me." And these will go away into eternal punishment, but the righteous into eternal life.
Yeah. What do you hear here, friends?
Not a very forgiving God.
I mean, the way into the kingdom of heaven is through taking care of the people around you when they're in need. That's the big message.
Or Christ is present in all humanity.
That's true.
Seems to be more of a, you do this because you want something back, than what I feel like the real message should be is that it's, you do this because it's his own reward.
Where do you see that, Fred?
Well, I mean, you don't get into heaven unless you do this. Here's a list of requirements, and none of them focus on the fact that if you do that, if you fulfill these, you feel good. You feel good about yourself. It's a way to happiness for you.
Well, the people who were saved, the righteous, didn't even know what they were doing. I mean, I am more with this is a message of how to live and how to be, rather than, you get to heaven or you don't get to heaven.
I see the stick here. I don't see the carrot.
I like this message because it seems to be very accessible.
Hmm,
And it also seems that it provides a practical path.
Hmm.
And I mean, it's not like you have to go to the temple this many times or give this many offerings or sacrifice so many doves. It's quite different. And it's something that everyone can relate to.
And it is kind of reassuring that he's not saying you need to give all your money away or all your clothes or all
Mm.
your food. If you in your life see hungry people and arrange for them to have food or and all these other things, I think that's as 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 you say, it's an easy compare. It's not that demanding. You should be able to do this with a life.
I like the way you said that, Ellie. You should be able to do this with a life.
In Judaism, when they pray between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur to be sealed in the book of life, one of the things they pray for, there's three terms, and I can't remember all of them. One is like charitable giving, but one of them is tzedakah, and it's about good deeds. It is about sort of giving that person a hand up who, needs it, or delivering something to your elderly neighbor or helping somebody in need. And it's a very important focus of these three things. I know one is charitable giving and one is tzedakah. Can't remember, maybe the other one is prayer, but there's three components to how you really ensure that you're going to be in the book of life during this week, and how to live, and of course it'd be great if we did it all year long, but this 1 week of focus it's particularly important. So,
Well, and Kim, I need to go back and look. I have to brush up my Hebrew a little bit, but I think that word tzedakah is related to the word for righteousness in Hebrew.
it might be.
And so I'm almost positive, and I will try to figure that out. But that suggests, what does it mean to be righteous? It means, well, I don't want to finish that. What does it mean to be righteous? If that's true, that they are etymologically connected, which I'm almost positive that, what does that suggest about what righteousness looks like?
It does, Patty, sorry, just to interrupt. It says, it's translated, it's the idea of doing good deeds rather than saying good deeds, and that it's translated most often as righteousness, doing righteousness.
My Hebrew is not as bad as I thought it was. Thank you.
There you go.
It's really rusty. So what does that suggest about what righteousness is?
It's
You
about-
have to act. You have to act, I guess.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, there are other answers. I mean, if you believe the right stuff or you perform the right rituals, then you're okay. But that's not the message here. The message here is do the good deeds.
Yeah. And oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, it doesn't, I was starting to think, well, this means empathy, but then it really goes beyond that. Empathy itself isn't enough. It's the action. And you can look with pity, you can feel with, but if you don't do something about it, the picture isn't complete.
Beautiful. And Fred, I was reminded, that's what I started to say. So that's twice I started to say this, is that it reminds me of our conversations about James. And you're always reminding us about living our faith and acting our faith. Exactly. Yep. So this is consistent with a lot of the things we've talked about. Does anything bother you here? Or are there any words in the Greek we want to look at?
I didn't know if anybody knew why goats get such a bad rap.
Like goats.
Page 2.
Let,
Just not sheep, I guess.
I just interested in this word separate, verse 32, just curious. I did not have a chance to look at it ahead of time. Aphorizo, mark off from others by boundaries. Okay, to exclude as disreputable, to set apart for some purpose. Interesting. Okay, I'm not sure that really sheds a whole lot of new light on it, but I was curious.
Well, I think that Jesus is known as the good shepherd, not the good goat herd.
Great
Just a
quote.
cultural thing.
I mean, what comparison is he gonna go for?
Hmm.
If
Wheat
you're gonna
and chaff.
separate, I mean, I guess he could have not
Hmm.
used a metaphor and just said, separate the bad people from the good people. But
Who would remember that?
Exactly.
Were sheep more valuable than goats in some way? I mean, just at the time, or
Oh, that's a good question.
Well, they're more obedient. Translated as really stupid. And but you can get milk and meat and wool from them, whereas goats are feisty and they smell bad and they give good milk, but they're, I guess you can,
You eat
yeah,
them.
you make wineskins out of goats. But
And you definitely eat the meat.
get me a sweater and you can eat it.
It's a little tough, but you can eat it. It's not as
That's
tender.
enjoyable. Yeah. But
I don't know. Some old mutton can be pretty tough.
True.
mhm.
I guess he just needed some comparison.
yeah, and I'm trying to think
Well,
of anything else in the culture that you could say, well, you know, I have this and I'm going to separate this from that, other than wheat and tares. But
Okay,
he used a
okay,
different one.
good. I'm glad you mentioned the wheat and tares. I was going to bring that up too. What do you remember about the parable of the wheat and the tares?
Well, you have to allow them to grow up together and separate them at the last judgment,
Exactly.
because uprooting one as they grow would damage the other.
Exactly. I'm not sure how to connect the dots here, but that definitely came up for me as well as I was thinking about this passage.
I'm trying to figure out how love your neighbor fits into a whole bunch of you are going to hell. Like, and you're accursed and you will depart from me into eternal fire. So I'm trying to get that whole concept of forgiveness and redemption and, all of that.
Well, he's speaking to a living crowd. I mean, the end of time hasn't come yet, and he's begging people to change the way they're looking at the world.
Mhm.
So I think that's to me, is love in that.
Seems to be
And-
mainly a threat.
Yeah.
I mean,
If you
it's
perceive it
missing the
that way.
gnashing of teeth, but everything else is there.
But
And then
the eternal fire is for those who don't do what? Going back to what Ray just said.
Any of these.
Don't live
Visit
right.
him in
That's
prison or help a sick person.
Which
Yeah,
could
let's-
be,
so that-
yeah, and that could be summarized as love, right? So if the ethic is loving one another and one fails to do that,
But I feel like I would know a lot of people who are going to hell by this definition. And that's kind of terrifying because I really only thought Hitler was there. Maybe a few others.
but he won't be
Pol Pot,
lonely.
Stalin.
I don't know.
As I
Yeah,
say, this is
they're
a
false
threat,
prophets.
not a.
well, I have a question, which is, he's talking to people. He's trying to persuade them. What's he trying to persuade them of? To do good deeds. And this threat of hell and the promise of heaven are ways to motivate people to do good deeds. But is he bringing to the people this idea of hell? Is he inventing it and saying, you may not have thought about this before, but there is a hell and you might go there unless you do good deeds? Or is this a pre-existing belief that people already have, and he's building on it and trying to explain why doing good deeds is important based upon something that they all share and they all believe? My instinct is that it's the second, right? He's trying to be a persuasive speaker by keying into this pre-existing belief and saying, I know you believe in hell, but if you believe in hell, then one way to avoid it is to do these good deeds, as opposed to inflicting on them and saying to them, you may not have ever thought about this, but I'm here to tell you there's a hell and you might go there.
Straighten up and fly right. Yeah, that's a really helpful reframing, Mark. Thoughts about what Mark just said?
Is he talking to Sadducees or Pharisees?
It would make a difference, yes.
Might believe there's an afterlife, but my understanding is the Sadducees didn't.
But remember,
well, let's
who is he speaking here? We talked about this last time too. To whom is he
I thought
speaking?
it to the disciples, yes.
Yeah.
So presumably the disciples believe in this afterlife, that he's saying, yes, you can avoid it by being loving.
I think the most important thing in this is that he's drawing an equivalency between loving God and loving your fellow man.
Bingo.
Yeah, that's it. That's the key.
When was it that we saw you hungry? They're all scratching their heads, right? And saying, huh?
You've been with us this whole time. So
yeah.
I mean, I first of all, Fred hit something with the Sadducees and the Pharisees, and there was a difference in the concept of an afterlife or whether there was a hell at all. And so it wouldn't have been universal. It's like now, I mean, casually we can say, oh, I'm going to hell for that, jokingly. And it's a cultural thing that sits there that doesn't need to be taken seriously. It's an illustration.
Can I just put a comment?
I looked this up one time, and if I recall, in Judaism, there wasn't a fiery hell as such.
Right.
It was more a place you're isolated and away from everything. And that the concept of hell, as we picked it up, was their reference to Gehenna,
Exactly.
which was the place next to Jerusalem where they burned all the garbage.
Yep, it's a valley right next to the Temple Mount. It's exactly. It's the fire pit. It's the garbage pit. Exactly, John. The comma I wanted to put there was that, throughout the New Testament, when the Sadducees are referenced, how are they? What's the appositive, the apposition that goes next to them? What do they? The Sadducees are those who. Crickets. They don't believe in the resurrection of the dead. I think it's a stretch to say that they don't believe in any kind of judgment or this idea of Gehenna, but they don't believe in resurrection. So going back to Mark's point, I do think that this concept, certainly the concept of judgment, is intrinsic to Judaism. We talked about it last week when we were looking at Daniel. And throughout Hebrew scripture, there's this concept of judgment. So Mark asks a question: is Jesus building on the mindset and the worldview, cosmology that his hearers already have, or is he introducing a new concept?
Or is this just another way of his telling the Jews, get on board with Christianity or be left behind?
Well, again, there's no Christianity at this point, right?
Okay, get on board with Jesus as the Messiah or be left behind.
But there, in this passage, there's no Jesus or Messiah. It's
Exactly,
doing unto the least of us.
I
exactly.
mean, we can all look around us and see people who aren't doing and people who are doing these things. And I mean, it's a pep talk for the ones who are doing the right thing or capable of it. I don't need to, you know, somebody said earlier, you know, virtue is its own reward. Well, malice is its own reward too.
Yikes. Yeah. Yeah.
I think, because I mean, I think again, Patty, you showed Daniel last week the thing, and the first verse out of this is directly saying, remember what Daniel said. The Son of
Exactly.
Man is going to come and there's going to be a judgment. And so he's putting it, I think, as Mark said, precisely into that pre-existing framework. But the message that is there is the message of treating the least of these, actively doing it, not just being empathetic, but actually doing the deeds.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that's, you know, when we think about Matthew, as we've been talking about for 46 sessions now, I keep track of these things, that, you know, what's Matthew's major agenda to draw this through line from Judaism into the, you know, the way of Jesus. And so building on Daniel, building on this concept of the Son of Man and this apocalyptic vision, that makes sense, right? Because he wants to have continuity.
Well, I think that the Jews are a very legalistic group with the commandments and things like that. So I think that in this way, where he speaks to them of really how to live in glory with kind of like physical instruction and things to do, and not necessarily that conceptual stuff of how we view our brothers and sisters or that kind of thing, is more helpful to that group of people to hear instruction. Just like, you know, whatever, love your neighbor or don't covet your wife, you know, your neighbor's wife. Like, it's like, okay, I got this. Now, how they're going to apply it, I don't know, but you know.
That's helpful. And when we think, you know, compare Matthew to when we read John, right, which is very philosophical and ethereal, and you don't necessarily, you get the beautiful scene of Jesus washing the feet of the disciples, but you don't get a whole lot of how-tos, right? It's much more theoretical. And Matthew, there's this pragmatic, this is what you do. That's a really helpful point. Are there any potential pitfalls in this that you can see?
Well, I think sometimes when you scare people, it becomes too big of a message for them to absorb. You know, like in business or in marketing, they say like, if Mothers Against Drunk Drivers wants to say like, don't drink and drive, they can't show you scenes of accidents. Things that are too much are just terrifying. And then people they're too much. And then they might just be like, okay, that guy's a quack, because they're terrified. They don't want to hear that message because it might mean that based on their historical behavior, something horrible is going to happen to them. I just think it's a lot to put out there, but maybe if the group that he's speaking to is a little more sophisticated in their understanding of him, maybe it makes sense, but I think it's a hard message.
Going back to what Fred
God
said.
is obviously allowed to play by his own rules, but you know, humanity is supposed to forgive 70 times 7 and, you know, over and over again. And, you know, this is saying, you know, when the game is over, time's up, there are no second chances.
Yeah, I think the core message, though, just to go back to it, is do good deeds. And I think he's not inventing the idea of judgment and being scared of the afterlife. That's already there. People are already scared about that. And he's not creating that fear with his message. He's building on it, but he's not creating it. I think the pitfall, if there is a pitfall, is is something different. It's you don't need anything else. You know, if you just go out and do good deeds and you don't do anything associated directly with your religion, you don't go to rituals, you don't have certain kinds of beliefs, then what's the difference between someone who simply does good deeds and is charitable and well-intentioned and a believer? That's the risk, it seems to me. He seems to be saying it's absolutely necessary to do good deeds, and it's also sufficient. I mean, if you do them, you get to heaven.
Mhm.
Well,
So
how do you tie
that's
that
the
into
risk
the
in my mind.
parable of the Good Samaritan, Mark?
I'm looking at this passage, nothing else,
Yeah.
just this passage. This passage seems to say
Isolation, yeah.
you do good deeds, you're home free.
Well,
The
and
Good
I like what
Samaritan is,
Donna, and I agree that, you know, one of the most important messages is to equate, you know, the Son of Man with all man, and to really be like, take care of your brothers and sisters. There's no hierarchy here anymore. That's not what goodness is. Goodness is not just being good to the landowner or being, you know what I mean? It's like, be good to the lowest of you.
Mm.
And
I
that
think that
message is very good.
I think that Jesus, if this is directed to the disciples, he had some serious doubts about them. And the way they respond to him, it seems as though he was right, because they take him very literally and say, well, Lord, you know, we've never seen you hungry, and we've never had to visit you in prison or whatever. And he feels that they need a big nudge to focus on the all people in the world and not be so focused on him.
I love that. And again, let's think about where this teaching, this preaching comes in Matthew's gospel. Now, we don't know for sure when Jesus said this, if he said it exactly like this, because each gospeler moves things around. But in Matthew's gospel, when is this taking place?
On the road to Jerusalem.
Yeah, they're in Jerusalem, and what's about to happen?
gonna overturn the temple, the money changers, and get in some trouble.
I think he already did that.
Oh, well,
Did.
then he's already
He's
in
about to be
trouble.
crucified. This is 2 days before Passover.
Exactly. In John, see that just as a parenthesis, and this is an example of how gospelers move things around. In John's gospel, I believe, the turning over the tables is at this point. And so it's like, okay, there's fodder for going after him. But Matthew does it differently. So this is happening, as John says, right before Passover, right before the weeks, the events that we know of as Holy Week. And so again, and we've seen this week after week recently, it's like turning up the intensity, turning up the heat, quite literally here. And so, the stakes are high. And, to that point about, someone said, was it Kim or Donna who said, it's a great equalizer. And that's important because as Jesus is about to depart from them, to be separated from them, at least in the earthly plane for a while, then they need to care for one another as they would care for him. And that's very powerful. I want to go back to
But I also say, Patty, this also comes right after 4 parables about being wakeful, being watchful, something's going to happen. And here it is. Here it happens.
Exactly. It's sort of the crescendo, right? I wanted to go back to Fred's question to Mark about the parable of the Good Samaritan. And yes, Mark, I totally agree. We're looking at this in isolation. And if we did think about, if we extrapolated a little bit to think about the parable of the Good Samaritan, to me, it's absolutely and utterly consistent, right? Because the parable of the Good Samaritan is about who is my neighbor. And so, the Samaritan is not the one who professes faith in the Jewish God and does not profess faith in Jesus. And
He's
yet
who professes faith in the Jewish God. He just worships him differently.
well, okay, but what I started to say is yet he is the one, right? Because we were talking about, it being believing in Jesus as Messiah. Someone just said that. So he is the one whom Jesus himself identifies as doing the will of the Father, loving the neighbor, the one who shows mercy. So to me, it's really consistent. And it's less about how many angels can dance on the head of the pin as it is about living this life. It's about setting heart and soul on living life differently. And that's that invasion that Louise picked up on before, right? How does God invade the world? By changing the way we interact with one another and engage with one another. That's what's so subversive to me.
So there's a dichotomy here of, are you waiting for God to come down and set things right? Or are you responsible for getting out there and setting things right yourself?
Ah, good. Is it a dichotomy or is it a both and? I'll throw that question out there.
Well, I can't do anything about moving God, along. The only thing I can affect is my own world.
Yeah, but yes, you can. You will move what God has as the end by all of us doing this. It will happen. We will bring the end about.
I just don't see that, and even Jesus says, there's a plan, but nobody knows what it is. No one can foresee it. There's nothing I can do to accelerate or, affect it. All I can do is try and bring about, the change that I want to see by my own actions.
Well, it's great that you want to see it, but even more importantly, it's the change that God wants to see, right? And so I think that's what John's talking about, is that we participate in God's transformation of the world. And it's wonderful if our hearts are, if our desires are aligned with God's. I think it's a lot more efficient that way.
But you have that Thomas Merton prayer, that you say, that where he says, he wants to be aligned, but he cannot be sure.
He wants to do, he wants to do what God wants him to do, but he's not sure that what he's doing.
He's not sure what it is.
He's not
well,
sure.
but the one thing he does say, and I've got, because I was struck by this and I have it in front of me. He said the one time he says, I believe is, but I believe that the desire to please you does in fact please you. And I hope I have that desire in all that I am doing. So which I read as the same theme here. That's, it's the doing is gonna get to and please God.
I keep coming back to the two great commandments: love God with all heart, soul, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. These two, there's an equivalency there.
Yes.
The second is like unto it in the words of the prayer book, but there is an equal sign there. Loving the neighbor is loving God. And that, I think, is consistent with Merton's prayer too. We certainly know when we're acting in a loving way toward a neighbor. And if we are somehow not in line with God's purposes because we do that, I'd be really surprised.
Yeah, I like that, Ray. I think this, love your neighbor as yourself, and mean, here's another commandment, to see the wretched of the earth as the presence of God. That's really what this story is all about. To look
Well,
around the world and see that you're not going to find God by just, looking up into the trees and the clouds or going inside
Or the
yourself.
books or the rituals, yes.
But you go and see the real people in the world, and that's where you will find God. I think that's a very powerful message. And I think it's very different from the other message, which is also there about fearing hell. This
Mhm.
is much more, if you want to experience God in the world, there he is right in front of you in the person of people in need.
So
Mm,
Jesus
I
is a different lens through which to see the other, right? Donna, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I think that what I'm seeing in the parable is that Jesus thinks Jerusalem is coming, I'm going to be crucified, and these disciples are going to fall down on their stomachs weeping, and then they're going to get up and go home to their families, broken men.
Hmm.
And they aren't going to do what I've trained them to do. They don't have the message of what they're supposed to do. And where would the world be if they had just, it's like, oh, my Lord is gone. I'm going to go home and mourn forever,
Mhm.
which you wouldn't blame them for it in a
Mhm.
way.
Mm-mm. Mm-mm. You sure wouldn't. Mm.
I will just say one more thing about just Judaism from what I've learned is that it's this very significant thing that they do at the holidays once a year, especially in like Orthodox synagogues, that people descendant from three families get their feet washed and nobody else. No, it doesn't matter. Like my husband's family founded the Orthodox synagogue in 16th Street in Washington. He was not um righteous enough for this act to be done to him. It was like the Levites, the Kohans, and there's a third family. And anybody descendant from them goes up to, well, men, the Bima, and get their feet washed. And so when he did what he did with washing this woman's feet, it was very, very radical. I think one, to touch a woman, and two, for her to be, I mean, people, you always look up to that Bima and think like, oh, wow, they're like, these fabulous, they're, I mean, whatever, they're righteous, or according to God, there's something special, right? And he's just knocking that all out and saying, no, there's nobody, each person is the same before God. And I think it's really a significant message for them. So he's given them a lot to think about.
It
Well, and
does
it
to
also,
us.
go ahead, Fred.
I mean, it does to a certain degree come back to your conception of the nature of God. The Judeo-Christian God is a God with personality. He picks things. He chooses winners and losers. He has his preferences, and he may have absolutely irrelevant things that he just says to do, and you do them. Then there's the God, where is a tide. It's an arc of the universe, as Martin Luther King said. The arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. That's just the nature of it. It's like a river, and you can swim against the river, but if you want to make progress, you swim with the river.
What I was going to say a moment ago was that I think there's a distinction here between thinking about God and intending to, to do all the right things, and I want to be counted among the righteous, right? And then practice, which is a habit that is cultivated by doing. And I'm thinking about the distinction between, coming to church and saying all the prayers, but not really having access to a sense of God's presence with us. And that's true for a lot of people. And what happens is, over the course of time, as we recite the prayers, as we come forward to receive the sacrament, which is transformational, as we seek to care for the neighbor, the other, the wretched, as Mark said, something happens within us that we are changed. And it's not so much a head thing. It's not about what we think about God, as it is about our relationship with God. And that really strikes me in this conversation, is that what Jesus is looking for is not so much a head orientation as a heart and soul and hands orientation. We'll put it that way. It also strikes me that, it's not arbitrary who's going to be exiled into the eternal fire, that there's choice, right? There's agency. You can turn around. You can, and it seems to me that the reason Jesus tells this is so that they know it's not too late, right? If it were already too late, he wouldn't bother, right? That you have a choice. You can choose to set your heart on caring for others and seeking God in the least of these, or you can turn a blind eye, and that's up to you.
But does he say it at the bottom, to where, like, I'm just still reviewing like what's on that screen, like that he gives them an opportunity to say, like, you can change this judgment?
Well, yeah, because he's giving this, this either or, right? Which is always
It's not too late.
It's always
It's not too.
It's always sort of a signal in the Gospels when Jesus sets up this dichotomy, this either or. And clearly there is choice here, right? Because what he wants is, his end game is, he wants them to adopt this behavior, because he's as concerned about individuals, being out in isolation in Gehenna, as he is about this radical transformation of society, of the world. And the way to affect that is for people to care for each other. So it's in Jesus's interest to have people do these things. And Jesus doesn't want them to be cast out. He wants this transformational work to happen. So yes.
Do you ever change somebody's heart with threats?
Sure.
See,
I mean, that's the whole art of political propaganda. And well,
I'm not sure you're advancing your argument, Ray.
Well, I'll take it as it is. I mean, I think we see that around us all the time. We reward hatred, and propagate hatred. You get more of it. That's changing of hearts. The opposite is also possible.
Well, that would be my point. If you want to change people's hearts towards, good actions, love of God, however you want to put it, threats probably are not, that then you get that kind of, and it's been a theme in Christianity since the beginning almost. Do this or else.
Yeah, that's it.
I mean,
good, Ray.
I was just going to say, I mean, my great aunt Maisie, may she rest wherever she is, was really a miserable snake of a human being. And, she took that into eternity with her. It's there with her forever. And, talk about some other brand of salvation where that is rectified. I mean, she believed in purgatory, so maybe, but I mean, it seems to me that we see it around us, and people carry that. What more threat is there going through life being as miserable as you are?
Yes, I totally agree. I'm just saying that, you probably don't change someone's heart by saying, do this or else. Because
Patty,
what inspires them to do that is then not love, but fear.
I have a question because when he's speaking to them, it sounds like in this passage that it's in the past tense, that that you who gave me no food, I was thirsty and you did nothing, that it sounds like the judgment's already been made, but is that not?
It's not, because
Okay.
look at how it starts. When the Son of Man comes in his glory, at the time of judgment.
Okay. So there's a little bit more time.
Definitely.
Okay.
Definitely. Great question.
I would rephrase all this stuff about punishment and reward slightly differently. I mean, to me, if you're looking for salvation, or you're looking for enlightenment, or and you're searching for it, you're trying to get there, and you never get there. I mean, that's a bad situation to be in. That's punishment enough. It's not something else that is going to happen to you that's bad. It's you won't get out of that situation. And if you're looking for your salvation, you're looking for meaning, you're looking for enlightenment, the way forward is to look at the people around you. And if you do that, then you will escape from the current situation you're in, your current punishment. I wouldn't think of the punishment as something else that happens to you for failing to do this. It's where you are, and it's a situation that you're trying to escape from, rather than something that's going to happen to you if you don't do the right thing.
I like that.
There's a saying that we each carry the key to heaven within us and the key to hell. And, the irony is they're both the same key.
Strange metaphor.
I wonder if Jesus had the best meal of his life, with getting his feet washed that night. Everybody saying, "Oh my gosh, we must serve."
Well, he was the one washing the feet, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Patty?
Yes.
Yeah, I just have a question. Is it been, again, I'm new to this. When it talks about the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world, what does that mean? The foundation of the world?
Well, let's ask the group first. What do you all hear when Louise reads that?
I hear that was God's intention from the instant of creation, that the people should have that life.
The God from the days of Adam and Eve and the dirt and the, let there be light. That God, that all of that from this point forward till now, or till the end of time.
Yeah, and if we think about that, the Genesis creation accounts, and humankind is given dominion, and that's obviously a complicated word, but charged with stewardship, we'll put it that way, of creation. It seems to me that it's from, in that, again, that cosmology, that worldview, that it's God's intention that humankind is going to inherit this, that this is gift. And then the question is, well, what do we do with that? And boy, have we messed up.
Mm-hmm.
That was a great question, Louise. Anything, there's so much. Oh, go ahead.
I would just ask Louise if she feels like we gave her a plausible answer.
Well, yeah, I mean, so the foundation that I'm thinking foundation is more of sort of almost a building, like the
A base.
the bottom of the world as opposed to the founding of the world?
Let's see what the Greek says. Katabolai. A throwing or laying down, the injection or depositing of the, oh, there you go, of the virile semen in the womb. There you go. Of the seed of plants and animals, or a founding, which is to say laying down a
Down the foundation.
So it's kind of a both end, isn't it? It's the act of founding and putting down that foundation. So I think, and I know that, yeah, the bole part of that Greek word means thrown. So for example, parable that comes from that same bole is ideas thrown together. So this concept of something being thrown out there, not thrown away, but, you know, produced, coming forth from. And great questions.
And then the only other the thing that struck me is what if, I mean, I realize he's talking to the disciples, but since we're taking it beyond that, and this is advice to everybody, I mean, what if you're in a situation where you're barely getting by and you're not really able to do these things?
Great question.
Then maybe you're one of the sick who would be the receiving end.
Right, but it doesn't really, it says that you need to do these things. And my question is, okay, well, if you, and it talks about stranger, as opposed to say, taking care of your family. My mother always used to say, charity begins at home. You know, you need to take care of your older relatives. You need to take care of anybody in your family who's isolated. That's the first priority. That's what she viewed as the first priority. So I'm just get one, not everybody is going to be able to reach out and take care of strangers because they're barely getting by.
Well,
and maybe I'm just taking it way too far because he is talking to the disciples.
I actually don't think that you are. What do you all think about that?
I think Confucius, you know, said family is the basis of all civilization, and you know, everything builds from the family. Mosey, who came along after him, said it doesn't work if you just take care of your family. You have to treat everyone as family.
Well, I think Jesus has said, you know, he starts by saying, when I was naked, when I was, or, you know, whatever, he's talking about himself. So he doesn't, you know, he doesn't really differentiate between whether it's a stranger or they knowing him. You know, I think that he would have been fine with just acts of, you know, whatever we want to call it, love and kindness. And if there's someone who is in prison, who's limited or is sick, those are the people who would receive these acts. And then, you know, maybe another verse in the Bible somewhere else is about paying it forward. But, you know, at this point, at some points, maybe all of us need to be receivers versus the givers. You know,
and that certainly happens when people, you know, are sort of at the end. You know, you need a lot of help at that point.
Exactly.
That's also what the foot washing, I think.
Exactly.
You know, first your feet are washed and then you wash somebody else's feet. We all need to be giving, but we all need help at some point also.
And part of that, allowing the other to care for us, whether it's visiting us in prison or giving us clothing or food or washing our feet, is about humility, right? And that recognition that each of us, and it goes back to that worldview about that someone, maybe it was you or Donna who was talking about the equality, the great leveling, that we're all deeply interconnected. And so, you know, it's not about, oh, well, you know, the Lady Bountifuls whose job is just to give and give and give and write big fat checks, and you know, the poor wretcheds who are just sit there and receive. It's a, you know, depending on the day and the situation, can be one or both in the same day. So there's that, it's that great equalizer. Donna, you were going to say something.
Oh, well, all I was gonna say is, I wish Elin were here because I think she backed me up, but think of all your travels. We've all been traveling a certain extent, and I know in my travels, I've seen the poorest people be very generous and want to share what they have.
Absolutely. I'm thinking about my trips, Kim, to Haiti with St. Andrews, and the folks in the little village that we help who really have nothing, but the hospitality is so extraordinary that
Mhm.
it will make you fall to your knees and weep with this incredible sense of humility.
That's amazing.
It really is. And, it seems like that's part of Jesus's worldview here.
Mhm.
Jesus was very much about community,
Mhm.
restoring people to
Definitely.
community. And a community is not all about, taking from it. The community is also about giving back.
Exactly.
And remember how there is, I mean, I think that all of us would feel the same way if some little old lady who has barely any resources and, bakes us a pie for the holidays, how much more meaningful that is than somebody who might buy something.
Give you a big box from Harry and David.
Yeah, and maybe that's a lovely gift too, and maybe they went way out of their
I
way for
hope
that.
it is.
But you know what I mean, that
Mhm.
that
The
sometimes the
widows might.
meaning, how
Yeah.
hard they've had to work for it. And I think that there's some passage in the Bible about when those people are at the side of the road, Patty, and they are eating the grass, and the wealthy man drives by and says, "What are you doing eating grass? Come to my home for dinner tonight. This isn't good. This grass isn't good for you," or whatever. And they go to his home thinking that they're going to have a lovely meal. And it ends up, he says, "Oh, yeah, you can eat from my grass. My lawn is so much prettier. My grass is so much greener." And that's like his gift to them. And, one of those messages is, give what you can. What's easy for you to give is not necessarily a gift if it's like of nothing from you. So I guess it's not in exactly what you give, but how much of yourself that you're willing to sacrifice in those ways for the things that you're giving.
Well, and Fred, I don't know if y'all heard Fred mention the widow's mite, and I was thinking the same thing. When Jesus observes the widow coming into the temple treasury and she drops, a mite, a tiny amount of money, which is so much more meaningful than people who are giving from their excess, right?
Mhm.
It's a
Right.
question of first fruits versus leftovers. Do we give to God? Do we give to others, first and foremost? Or do we wait and see if there's anything left? Quickly, I'll tell you a story about my children. Years ago, we were trick-or-treating in New York, and our little town was spread out enough that we used to have to drive as a family from one house to the other. So we were on our way from one stop to another stop, and Randy, who loves Reese's peanut butter cups, called back to the boys and said, "Hey, I see that you all got Reese's peanut butter cups at this last house. Would somebody give me one?" And one of my sons said, "Let's see if we have any left over." And that has always been, this framework for me. It's like, yeah, of course, that's very human to say, well, if there are any scraps left, we'll give them to you. Or to say, "Of course, Daddy."
Well, did any of them pass the test, Patty? Did any of them? Yeah.
Older, I will say that they've become, but it's at that different frame, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right, we are past time. I have a question for you about, I know, Ray, I haven't forgotten. I just want to ask a question,
Okay.
and then I'm going to give you the clean, you can back clean up. Next Wednesday, the 27th, the parish office is closed. It's also the day of the blood drive. So Fred and Louise and I will be involved in that. Do we want, and I know that others are donating as well. Do we want to try to squeeze in a Bible study meeting, or do we want to postpone until the following week? I'm good to do it either way.
I will be out of town that day,
Okay. So maybe we should skip this week and this coming week and then regroup in January.
Okay.
That's good by me.
Okay.
fine by me.
Ray, what were you, tell us your story of,
Well, I'm looking at the Gaza refugee thing, and I'm looking at by policy, people are being starved. And I don't know how to, what the magic bullet is, but I have begun to append this question in many places and post it as many places as I can. And that is, why is the US not airlifting food and medicines into Gaza? And just simply posing the question. I have not had an answer yet from anybody, including my elected representatives, as to why that is the case. But it seems to me that, so just adding that as a signature line, adding it as a Facebook post or whatever you're using, and asking the question as many places as possible may raise some consciousness about how anomalous this really is, that we fed the entire city of Berlin for, I believe it was 6 months by parachute, a much larger, equally destroyed population back in 1947, which is ancient history, but they still had airplanes. That could be done again. And if Mr. Netanyahu objects to it, I believe that the phrase is pack sand. I mean, I can't see that we are obligated to not be empathetic and to not do what we can do as a people. I cannot get in an airplane and drop food, but we have a government that should be doing that. And for want of a less vulgar term, we ought to be goosing them into it if we can. So I just put that out there as something, as a consciousness raiser. Thank you.
Good point.
yeah, and that's apolitical, right? That's not taking sides. It's caring for the least of these, those who are completely devastated by.
It's to hell with both governments, the Hamas government and the Netanyahu government.
Yeah.
They're off the table. This is a humanitarian thing, not a political thing, except that they have made starvation a political tool. And that is unconscionable.
Starvation of the innocent, but it all gets political as to who believes that the people of Gaza are guilty or innocent. I mean, there's this whole, do they deserve?
Doesn't matter, they're hungry. I'm sure their children are all innocent. Maybe we just send baby food. I mean, if that's the demarcation, I don't think so.
Yeah.
Well, we have airlifted food. It looks like we've airlifted United Nations food. And it does say, I'm looking at it, it's a November article, and it says we have I mean, it doesn't seem like a big number, but we have mobilized some. It says 100 million in human in assistance.
Well,
And I think
it's sitting on trucks outside the
it's
border.
Oh, it hasn't gotten in?
Yeah.
It's filtered through the two border crossings. Yeah.
But the
Well,
airlifting,
the Israeli government, don't say the Jews, Fred.
Okay.
When the Israeli government will let it go through.
Yeah, and then
I think that there's a lot of Jewish people who don't necessarily like the harshness of the government way before this happened. Way. And I say this from Adam's cousin who married a Jewish woman, that Netanyahu, was always more willing to go to war than a lot of people wanted that to be. That being said, they don't like Hamas, obviously, and they're they can rationalize certain things with Hamas, this is Hamas's doing or whatever, but It is a very difficult situation, and every day seeing the world news and those little, babies, no matter if they're Jewish or Palestinian, and they're hurt and without their sisters and brothers and parents, and they're in a hospital that's rubble. It's terrifying.
The trauma, I keep thinking about the generational trauma that it's going to ensue from this, for the hostages, for these children. It's, I mean, psychologically, this is going to mess up.
Well, and that's what the Israeli people are now. I mean, they are the descendants of the trauma of the Holocaust. Those people are still like living their parents' stories. They're still alive, those generations who are like, my mom was in the Holocaust or whatever, and so that's what happens.
They seem to have forgotten, the Passover, where they're, commended to be kind to strangers, for they were once strangers.
Yeah.
Well, again, we're talking about the government as opposed to people.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All I can say to the Americans on the Israeli side is, let the first American who wants to give their home back to the Native Americans be the one that criticizes Israeli. I'm not talking about not giving food or whatever, but I'm talking about the people who want the land. Because I feel like we all live in hypocrisy here. Like, oh, this land is, their land or not their land or whatever. And here we are, we live on borrowed land ourselves.
Stolen.
And can you imagine if the Native Americans coupled with the Russians and tried to drive us all out of our homes tomorrow and brought in tanks and, this and that? Like, it's crazy.
Yeah.
It's a crazy practical thought, but I do pray that on every side that, anybody who wants peace is given food and the opportunity for peace. So
I feed them whether they want peace or not.
Exactly.
yeah.
Even because they're human and they're hungry. Going
Yeah.
back to today's gospel. Oh, friends, there is so much subversive work we need to be doing, and it's overwhelming. And where to begin. And I just keep thinking whatever we can do helps that invasion, going back to the word that Louise picked up on in the opening prayer. God bless you all, and I hope you have a wonderful Christmas. Some of you I will see over Christmas. If I don't see you, if you're traveling or are in another congregation, just know you are loved, and we will rejoin each other in January. So God bless and thank you. This was a wonderful conversation.
Happy holidays.
Thank you, Patty.
Thank you.
Patty, Merry
Bye.
Thank
Christmas.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.